It's time for Ask Mike Mondays. Mike answers one listener's question every week. Here's Michael Becker and Paul Peebles.
Welcome to Ask Mike Mondays. I'm your host, Paul Peebles, and joining me today, of course, smartest guy in the room, Michael Becker.
Hey, Paul.
Michael, as everyone knows, owns over 4,000 apartment units. He's up to his eyeballs in non-recourse debt.
Yep.
Has $75 million of investors' money, and he is an expert on multifamily. So we thought we'd ask him a question today. Mike, can you give me a quick description of how NOI is calculated? Sure.
NOI stands for net operating income, and that's the key metric in the multifamily world, both on financing and buying and selling these deals. Everyone kind of gets down to the bottom line of the NOI. So really kind of the components, there's really two main components to it. You have your revenue, your income, and you have your operating expenses. So let's kind of first start with revenue because that's the top line. So really the revenue kind of first start with your market rent. So your gross potential rental income would be basically your total market rents. If every unit was at market, 100% occupied, that's kind of your market rent. And then from there, you take off your what's called loss to lease. And what loss to lease is basically what the market rent is versus what the actual scheduled rents on your rent roll. So, if you rented a unit 6 months ago and the rents were $40 or $50 lower than what they are today, you'd have a $40 loss to lease that month on that unit. And then you kind of take every unit on your rent roll across the entire property. And that's kind of how you calculate your loss to lease. From there, you actually have kind of like your other concessions. So if you're running like a special or you have employee rent discount, if like your maintenance guy lives on the property, you have half off his rent, you kind of take that off. And then from there, you have the actual physical vacancy loss. So if you have 5% of the units not rented, then that's kind of the next thing. You actually have your physical vacancy loss. And from there, you kind of get your net rental income, or NRI is what we call it, net rental income. That's kind of the delta between all those things I just mentioned. And then you start adding back your other income. So in your other income, you really have two major components. You have your RUBS, your ratio utility billing system. Your RUBS, your utility bill back income, your water, sewer, maybe electric kind of bill back. And then you have your other income like parking, trash, pest, application fees, late fees, things like that. And then from there, you take off any sort of bad debt expense that you might have from uncollected rent. And then at that time, you get kind of your effective gross income, or EGI is what we call it, EGI, effective gross income. That's kind of the difference between all those items I just mentioned. From there, you have your operating expenses. So think operating expenses, everything it takes to actually run an apartment complex, but it does exclude your debt service, your interest expense, or any sort of partnership expenses, as well as any like major one-time capital items. So in your operating expenses, you have things like payroll, utility costs, you have service contracts like your trash or your landscaping, things like that, as well as normal repairs and maintenance, anything kind of like normal repairs and maintenance or turnover cost. And then also you have big things like insurance and property taxes. So you take all those things and you subtract it from the operating income that I talked about earlier. And then the difference between those two is your NOI. That's kind of how you calculate it. And from there, that's what the lenders use when they do their debt service coverage ratios, as well as if you put a capitalization rate or cap rate, you divide your NOI by your cap rate, and that's kind of how you determine value.
So if you wanted to have, say, a 4% management fee, but you're an asset manager and you wanted to charge a 1% or 2% asset management fee, where would that expense line item go?
Yeah, so if the market expense for third-party property management fee, the management fee would be above the NOI line. So that would be included in your operating expense. But the asset management fee, which is like a partnership expense, would be below the line. So that doesn't impact NOI. That would be after the net operating income is calculated, because that's not a necessary expense to actually operate the property. But that's just kind of how you do it. It's not necessarily what the market would necessarily be.
So that's great information on that one, because we get that question sometimes. If we have an asset management fee on top of my management fee, does that affect loan dollars? And the answer is really no. It's an additional income line item for you. It's an additional expense item below the line off of NOI, but it should not have an impact on your loan dollars that you're trying to achieve.
The other thing, though, that is important when you're going and doing a loan, so this is different, or you're selling it, than how you operate the property. If you don't operate like the expenses at market, a potential buyer or the lender for sure will certainly make adjustments to your operating expenses when they underwrite it. And they're like the buyer's underwriting or the lender's underwriting. Because if you're a handy guy and you want to go to your property and change out garbage disposals, you don't charge for your time, I'm going to come in and buy it. I'm certainly not going to go in and change out garbage disposal, so we'll have to hire someone to do it. So I have to take the normal R&M costs and normal payroll cost into account. Even if you don't have that expense, the next person will underwrite to those expenses as well.
And that's absolutely correct, is that sometimes we see mom and pops that those expense items are not included into the operating statement, even though it's absolutely true. Is that the guy who's taking out the garbage disposal, which may be you that's doing it, typically going to charge a couple $100 to put it in or take it out or things like that. We need to see that in there. It just cannot be a line item of really no labor expenses or management expenses. Those line items are very important. So if they're not there, make sure you add in there. Last thing I want to talk about, Mike, is when you're qualifying for a loan, at least for Fannie Mae as an example, are they looking at the last, say, 12 months of income?
How do they make their adjustments? Sure. So when you qualify for a loan, typically what you'll hear, like from Old Capital, we'll say is we take T3 over T12. So what that means is essentially when they're underwriting these deals, they take the last 3 months of rental income, they annualize that, so they times 4. So the last 3 months of rental income times 4, they add the last 12 months of other income in, and that's your operating income that they underwrite to. And then they take the last 12 months of expenses, and that's kind of the T3 over T12. But like I mentioned earlier, they're going to take your operating expenses and make some underwriting adjustments. So if you're buying a property that has, say, for $10 million, is currently on the property tax rolls for, say, $5 million, with the county, they're going to make some basic adjustment. They're going to work with the appraiser and then say, okay, maybe they settle at 85% of the purchase price or $8.5 million times the millage rate, and that's kind of their underwriting property taxes, as well as if the current seller is paying their management company 5%, but you can hire a third-party management company for 4%, they can adjust that down. So there'll be little adjustments along the way to kind of get it. But that's the basics of how a lender will look at the deal.
I mean, that's extremely important because sometimes your seller, who may get you into a conversation, is going to kind of want to figure out, well, if we're going to sell this property to you, how have you underwritten the deal? They want to make sure that you're setting yourself with the right expectations of buying the property, that you didn't forget that line item of adjusted property taxes. So if they ask you for it, make sure you give it to them because they want to have a strong confidence level that you're the right buyer for their property. So some good information, Mike. Thanks. We appreciate that. Anything else we need to talk about?
Yeah, just if you guys found this information valuable, we certainly appreciate a rating and review on iTunes or Stitcher or any of the other podcast aggregators, as well as you can go to oldcapitalpodcast.com, and there you can find information about our sample due diligence checklist. That's the same checklist I basically attached to any LOI that I put out on properties we're looking to purchase, as well as the multifamily financing 101, kind of the Old Capital white paper that gives you the basics of apartment financing.
So great information, Mike. We appreciate that, and we look forward to hearing from another Ask Mike Monday. Thanks, Michael Becker. Paul Peebles here. Have a great day.